Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And today, as you see in the mutual video here, we have a guest, Michael Heath, Michael Heath, and he has an interesting site that we're going to talk about. I want to give you a little bit of a promo again because we have an event coming up here in the next month and a half, 6 weeks, I would say. And I think Mike's going to be there as well. It is what I've been talking about, the Go Therefore Conference 2019. Dr. Mike Spalding on his program, he takes and he is obviously promoting it because he's hosting it right there in Lima, Ohio. So the dates on that are July 26th and 27th. And it is going to be at the University of Northwestern Ohio. So, you know what? Check it out. Go to gothereforeconference.com, get your reservations, and the full video promo is going to be at the end of the video program on YouTube. And with that, Mike, thanks for jumping on board with me. You're traveling. It's exciting watching real motion in the back. It's awesome. You know what? From seeing you on Dr. Mike's program was interesting. Your background, a lot of the things that you're talking about are more than just the culture war. And you have been a culture war warrior for a good number of years. So, give us a little background on that, and then we'll just kind of jump into a few other things.
Well, first of all, Tom, thanks for having me on, and I love the name of your show, being a New Englander, right? I mean, yeah. I don't think you had the beer in mind when you picked Samuel Adams Returns, but you probably had the real guy, the real deal in mind. And what a activist he was, Samuel Adams.
Yes,
I think he was John Adams' cousin, if I remember correctly.
Correct. Yeah.
And he was really the guy who kept everything stirred up, and John kind of wanted to keep things tamped down a little bit. He was a lawyer, and so I don't think Sam was a lawyer. He was more of a rabble rouser, and he really helped inspire the revolution, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And we can learn a lot from him. Isn't he the one that said that takes a determined minority to
start the brush fires?
Start the brush fires, yeah.
That's right.
And that's what we need. And that's what I have done for 30 years. In the name of Jesus, I was the leader of the Christian Civic League of Maine, which was formed in 1897 by college professors, Bowdoin College, University of Maine at Farmington. It was then called the Farmington State Normal School in 1897, and clergy and lay people from all over Maine. In 1897, they formed this private association to encourage all the people of Maine in good citizenship, to enact good laws and provide for their impartial enforcement, and to elect honest and competent public officials. And they did all of those three. They pursued those three goals as the Christian Civic League of Maine. So that's still the name today. It's over a century old, and I was honored to lead it for 20 years, and I finished up in 2009. And I'm very proud to say that during my tenure, the Christian Civic League of Maine made it the highest priority to resist the idea that sexual orientation should be added to the Maine Human Rights Act. That, Tom, is the identical policy proposal that is being debated now in Congress, called HR 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I debated that very issue in Maine and succeeded. We stopped that from happening. We slowed them down for over a decade by taking the issue to the ballot. So when I say that I am a little bit familiar with Sam Adams, that's what I mean. I mean, I ran populist campaigns on what has become the most divisive and controversial issue in the entire United States, and it's, of course, being pushed now by the United States throughout the world, and that's the issue of homosexuality.
Yes. So, I really appreciate that, your perspective on Sam Adams, because, as you know, he received the moniker of the father of the American Revolution. So from that whole point that, and just a little bit because it's Sam Adams' show, he he did study the law. In fact, his parents wanted him to become a minister because, as you know, that was a noble profession, whereas
Mhm.
being a lawyer was not. And
Mhm.
but when he was in college and when Whitfield came through, and he heard Whitfield preach, and that made a significant difference in his life. And then, as he was studying biblical law and he was studying the Old Testament, what became most interesting to him was what is good governance. And with all the things that were happening through his youth and his childhood and all of that, which we're not going to get into his story, but he then did pursue that whole area of what we would now call political science, but it was through a more of a law degree all the way into his master's work. And so he had that concept of good governance. And to your point, and what you're talking about, then the organization that you were a part of, that was the intent of the founders, that we would have that, as John Adams as well as Madison said, we would have what? Our Constitution was for a moral and, in Madison's case, virtuous people, but in John Adams' case, it was what? A religious people.
Yep.
So having organizations, because, and I'm sure as you studied, and I'm going to have you, get it back onto this, as you've studied the what's happened to the church in America, what we've seen is that transition right away in those early 1800s, moving away from our solid foundational principles to the extent that there was a book written that was called The Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution to remind the people that that was foundational. So the civic responsibility and that tie-in historically, that organization that you were a part of was phenomenal. But as we've seen, and in modern times, those Christian organizations, and I look at even what's called the Eagles, if you know the Eagles is an organization, but it was started by Christians in Seattle for
Mhm.
a similar purpose when you look at it. But nowadays, the Eagles is nothing like that. It's a
Mhm.
social drinking club more than it is anything that has to do with raising leadership and
Right.
responsible Christian people
Yep.
for civic responsibility. So, how did things transpire within the work that you were doing? Because uh, that takes the application of that Christian values, belief system, morality, and virtue, and allows it to be applied within the context of governance.
Yeah.
What did you
I
see
was
happen?
I was really blessed, Tom, to uh, be part of a 2-decade long civic enterprise that was uh, Christian first, but was very that sunk its roots deep into the idea that uh, the American idea that our government works because there is a separation of powers and because the people are recognized as one of those powers. Specifically, what I mean is we decided that the government on the issue of homosexuality, the main government, was lost because the oligarchy, those who had money, the elites, the powers that be in Augusta, our state capital, would that we would fail if we invested our money and our time in lobbying them and trying to persuade them to our point of view. But we recognize that because we live in America, we have this separation of powers, and we grant to the people uh, an equal status with the oligarchy, with the elected representatives. And in Maine, there was something called the people's veto. If we could gather 10% of the turnout at the last gubernatorial election in 90 days, 10% of registered voters in 90 days, we could force an issue to the ballot, and the people could do what the governor has the power to do, which is to veto a law that the legislature has passed and the governor has signed. It's kind of a rare populist uh, uh, power that's granted through the government, through the Constitution, to the people. And we used that successfully. We won. The legislature passed it. The governor signed it. We peoples vetoed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then this was the HR 5 law that's in Washington right now. It's the very same issue. They did it in Maine in 1998, and we vetoed it. The people vetoed it, not churches, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Churches gathered the signatures, which put the issue before the people, and a majority of the people rejected it. And then the legislature was so intent on pushing this that they did not force the other side to gather even one signature, and they put it on the ballot again. Mm-hmm. They knew they couldn't. They had the power. The legislature had the power to enact it directly, and the governor could have signed it again, and they could have forced us into another people's veto. But they knew that would be political suicide. So they put it on the ballot 3 years later, after we peoples vetoed it. They put it on the ballot again, and they spent even more money, and they were even more determined to pass it, and we beat them again, Tom. Yeah. We beat them again.
This goes into what we're seeing, even today, is where the people are placed against the people when the people are the sovereigns. So exercising that sovereignty, as was established from the foundations, actually it goes back to the Magna Carta. So in understanding those fundamentals that were brought into America, as you well stated at the beginning and you were talking, it's taking and then looking at all of these, what we would call the cabals, all of that which would the anti-federalists express could happen within a constitutional republic, especially as the people were separated from their moral thinking, which we know mm-hmm. is something that the Satan's always after, is separating us from that, or because of our fallen natures. And then when we see that the political side of things will try to manipulate to move forward those nefarious agendas, it always then becomes the sovereigns against the sovereign, but what will win based on effective communication and determination.
Yes, and so it was a real honor to be steeped in that uniquely American idea of the people being a sovereign for those 20 years. And what happened was millions of dollars was spent, and Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals was used brilliantly by the left. And the media was an accomplice, and they made the issue seem to the average Mainer like it was an extreme minority that was taking our position. And in fact, they were, after years of using my name and misquoting me, I mean years in the media of me being, of the issue being turned into me, personalized, me being personalized. Gay rights, Mike Heath, gay rights, Mike Heath. And it wasn't a group of people who felt this way. It was Mike Heath who felt this way, and he's just an idiot. And they personalized it, they froze me in place, and they eventually eroded enough support. They never got a huge majority, but they eroded enough support to get their way, to force their will. And then when sexual orientation was added to the Human Rights Act, very quickly, same-sex marriage followed. And now, of course, Maine is gone off the deep end with all this social.
And we could talk about that. And we're going to jump more into that in the next segment, because we have just about a minute left to finish up here. And just, from a summary position on that, it always becomes, and that was a great warning, again, of the anti-federalists, and taking and trying to get people to understand that when cabals have their interests and their special interests, even with the minority of people that will not that do not have that moral foundation, the capacity to impart legislative evil onto the rest of the population is doable. And that's what we see so often. That's what we're seeing continuously at every level of government. And as we hit these last few seconds, one of the things that Sam Adams always talked about, we'll pick back up with from an article that you wrote, is that everything that happens is local. And that's what Sam Adams said, is all governance is local. And so Sam Adams had it right, and those anti-federalists were able to captivate that and we'll come back in the next segment to continue our discussion with Mike Heath. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this next segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And we are enjoying a great conversation with Mike Heath. And we're going to talk a little bit more of what we picked up or left off with, rather, in the first segment. And we'll talk about his website, and that is michaelheath.org. I really encourage you to go there. He has a lot of information within that. And Mike, I have to take a moment to do some of the pitches that I usually do in the second segment. And that being that Liberty Works Radio Network has been gracious to me for over 5 years. They've invited me to the network, and they have me on in the 2 time slots on Saturday. And I always say to the viewers and the listeners is, folks, this is a listener-funded network, and kindly go in there, check out all the other hosts and hostesses, the live programming on the week, during the week, in the evening hours. You can have some great interactions, especially in the local Maryland markets. And then there is that special thing there that is the donate button. Hit that donate button because, again, it's listener funded, and everything that you contribute makes a big difference, and it keeps me on the air. And I have great guests then, like Mike, that's able to participate and go through those things that matter to you. So with that, Mike, let's pick up, because what I'm hearing, and I love the articles that you have, and I'm kind of pulling them up on my little tablet over here. You had a couple things here that I'm just going to key for the people on the a political snake pit. That's very interesting that you have posted. I love that. It makes me think of the adventures of what was his name that Harrison Ford played in? You know, he hated.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Raiders of the Lost Ark or something like that, whatever that was. But in your daily, your email archive, there were a couple of things that I think are, trying to pick up from where we were at. One that caught my attention, that if you can recall to, was the Killary one. Can you give us a little bit on that? Because I think that's kind of a tie-in to what we were talking about in the last segment.
Yeah. Hillary Clinton, you mean? Hillary Clinton?
Yes. Yeah, the Hillary Clinton.
I'm really honored to be participating in the EqualJusticeTour.com, and about a week ago, I joined with 50 other faithful Americans who went to Chappaqua, which is Hillary Clinton's rural hometown, where she and Bill settled in order to establish residency so that she could become a senator. And of course, she parlayed that into the Secretary of State's office. And then while Secretary of State, of course, she had those servers that are now infamous located in the house there in Chappaqua. So we're taking a chapter from taking our cues from Saul Alinsky and believing that if we're going to save our nation, we're going to have to personalize these issues and stop just being so nice and so civil in our rhetoric and pretending that the government's rules with public hearings and policy debates and all this stuff that nobody can understand or really cares about, and all this idea of being nice and civil to our betters, we're going to have to put that away, and we're going to have to take the fight to the other side, to the people who are trying to who are destroying us. I mean, the left wing is the wing of our politics that has created and maintains this right to kill babies in the womb. And now, of course, that debate, the so-called abortion debate, which was always about killing babies, not really about abortion, that debate has morphed now into whether or not it's right to kill babies who have been born. Yeah. So it's so clear on all of their issues, all their social and moral, all their so-called social issues, which are actually moral issues, actually spiritual issues. It's so clear that the left wing in America, I call them the demon rats, that they're off the rails. They have gone absolutely insane. They're insane. And so we have to single out someone like Hillary Clinton. And so many people have problems with what she's done. I mean, you've got the Attorney General who has said that that she committed 4 crimes, 4 felonies, and then he refused to do something about it. So we're calling for equal justice. It's grassroots. It's hard hitting. It's Sam Adams. Tom would be proud of us. I have no doubt.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as you're talking about even that, so we have, it's always been, as they call it, a transitory issue from the abortionist perspective. But I really love, to your point, what Louis Gormer did yesterday and having, and during the hearing, asking that pertinent question about, and did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay, good. The motion stopped
I'm here.
for a second. That's good. So he was pointing out to this actress for some, she's talking about abortion rights and all of that, and he was, to your point, bringing out, well, if this girl is born on an abortion that failed, what's her rights? And that was, we stymie them when we talk truth and bring reason into the play above emotionalism. And I think that's when you talk about the insanities of the left. They're not insane. They're Saul Alinskyites, to that whole point, that they're purposefully moving. And I go back even to Gramsci, because I studied him. Alinsky learned from Gramsci in so many different ways. And so when you take and you bring that, and you can move people within their sinful natures into that level of emotionalism, to the extent that now they become that mob that we're seeing even on college campuses. Your point is right. If we can go with a well set story to respond in a manner, and so many people have been afraid to do that. How did the organization that you're with now, and state who they are again for everybody, because I think it's important for the training, the understanding, and the ability to take and do that process correctly, because a lot of people don't even want to touch it.
Right. Yeah, the name of the organization, Christian Civic League of Maine. And what we did right, which I don't see enough of by Christians, is we occupied real political ground. Mm-hmm. We got a lot of earned media, but what we did was we occupied, and what I mean by that is we did political activism. We made homemade signs. We held events. We chose strategic targets where we could bring 10, 20, 30 people and get physical contact in a political sense, not in a warfare sense, mm-hmm. not with bullets, not in a violent sense, right. But in a forceful sense. And this is what Sam Adams was so brilliant at doing.
Yes.
When he saw that when the Boston Massacre happened, right, the British went on the offense with firearms there in Boston, Sam on that, and he created a narrative that inspired the Bostonians, and he threw fuel on the fire to inspire what needed to happen politically. Now that became a war, but it started as a political campaign. It started with political ideology at its heart. And what we've been confronting from the left is they're occupying. They're doing their march through the institutions. And we're being polite. And we're believing their propaganda. And we're not getting contact. And if we keep this up, we're going to lose everything. Now, God, I believe, has put a man who understands what it means to get contact in a political sense, and that would be Donald Trump. He has put a man in the White House who gets that part from a business perspective. He understands that when you're making a deal, it's not about exchanging emails. It's not just about exchanging emails and hiring lawyers. It's about being in the room with your adversary, the person you've got to make a deal with, and it's about getting contact. It's
Right.
about rustling feathers. It's about making people mad, possibly, in order to accomplish your goals.
Yes, no, absolutely. And so that goes back to the whole idea of every level of governance. So I sit on our county's mental health and recovery services board. I'm one of those members, and I'm on the finance committee. And so we're going through all these agency reviews. So, to that point, a lot of times there's folks on that board that are appointed by all of the mental health or from the director, and then there's a majority of people that are appointed by county commissioners. Well, now the county commissioners have business people like myself that are on there. And the point is that all of the serving agencies that come through looking for that taxpayer dollar have never had pushback. And so now we have people who are taking a moral position, who are taking a financial position, and actually pushing back on agencies, because when we look at who they are, what they are, and they're political entities, although they're nonprofits, it all comes from that point. And quite frankly, I'm the only uh, Bible believing, Reformation minded person on that board. I have a couple other people that are, as you know, in what you're doing, they have common minds, and we're able to build that coalition and ask all of those right questions. But what I see in every aspect, and I did on my program 2 weeks ago, was that mental health is a moral issue. So, which we've already said and talked about in the first segment. And to the extent that the churches have abandoned, they've absolutely abandoned our society to the extent that we have these problems from education to everything else that we're talking about, because we haven't built from that very beginning with the first entity that you were with a moral and virtuous people to engage in every aspect of governance. And I think we're hitting the 2 minute mark, so, or 3 minutes. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond, and then Kath will give me the wave on the last minute.
Tom, we've extended way too much. We've given way too. I'm going to get my finger in here. We've extended way too much trust to so-called experts. We need to think for ourselves. We need to think Christian. We need to be thinking Christianly. We need to be asking hard questions of these psychologists and these psychiatrists and these drug pushers and these social justice warriors who have these huge budgets and who accomplish some good, but end up promoting an enormous amount of evil. Look at the amount. Look at the situation in families of America now as a result of us trusting these ideologies that come to us through the social justice side of things, through psychology, through psychiatry, through trusting these ideologies. And that's what they are. They're ideologies. And that we've allowed them to get away with the idea that there isn't a morality to what they're teaching us and to what they're bringing to our most vulnerable citizens. And there is, Tom, a morality to it. And we must start pushing back against them.
Yes. And that goes to the whole point, is that in what you're talking about, you can legislate morality or you legislate immorality. And if you don't have the capacity to understand that we can live in a moral society, that our founders wanted us to live in a moral society.
We have to, right? We have to live in a moral society.
Yeah, and if we're not, then chaos rules. Just look at our college campuses. Just look at, so many other of the events that happen in the streets across this nation. Right now there's this LBGT Pride Month, and these people are just going absolutely berserk. But that is what happened, as I always say, that's what happened in the time of Noah. Not just Sodom and Gomorrah, which it was more recent history in our context, but it got to that point in the time of Noah, it was even more imaginary, worse and bizarre for God's judgment to come so hard. And we continue to see that. So your point in engagement, and we're going to wrap up in the next 20 seconds here, and then we'll come back in the third segment. But so hold that thought. I saw it. Hold that thought. that the point is that Sam Adams, he got it right from being his other moniker of the last Puritan. And those anti federalists, they understood Reformation truth into a political environment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, boy, we're hamming it home today that they did get it right. You know, we're talking about that last Puritan, Sam Adams, and in so many ways, I'm looking at a modern activist, and you are too, folks, of Michael Heath. Mike, it's just such a delight to be interacting with you and enjoying this time. You had a thought as we were going to break, so come on back with that. What were you thinking?
Oh man, I'm getting old, Tom. You know what? The old short-term memory.
All right,
I remember. We were talking about the fact that you're serving on that mental health board, and I was making the point about morality as it relates to mental health. And I started my career 4 years heading a Christian ministry called Bethany Acres, and so I got a little bit of experience being up close and personal with folks who are demon oppressed, is how I like to think of it now. I really think that we have done a disservice to all the world in so secularizing the idea of difficulty in living. When people get difficulties, we think that we need drugs or they should receive counseling, and we completely ignore the age-old, tried and true concepts of moral law, repentance, the virtues, the teaching of the virtues, the enforcement of the virtues, judgment, sin. You know, all those moral concepts we have shunted off, and we've totally secularized what we do to help people. And we all look to counseling and we all look to drugs now whenever we feel weakness, depression, anxiety, whatever it is. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for those helps, but I believe that they have overflowed their banks, and our country is awash in evil because the therapy, the solution that these disciplines are offering aren't enough. They aren't enough. They don't go far enough because, like you said, as we were moving out of the last segment, we do legislate morality. We have to. We can't. What, we want an immoral country? We want to live in immoral neighborhoods? It makes no sense, right?
Right. So, one of the things that all the different agencies, mental health and all of that, don't believe is that they're overflowing their banks because they keep looking at their checkbooks and their accounts, and they don't think that there's enough in there. So, as with
I know, and that's always a thing. Same thing with public schools. I ran for office 30 years ago for the House of Representatives, and the teachers union called me in, and they said, well, there's some kids coming and they don't win. And this was in Maine, and they come and their parents haven't fed them breakfast. And I was like 30 at that point, and I said, well, call the police. Yeah. I mean, if the parents are sending the kids, right, that's a law enforcement issue. That's not a public school issue. And they said, well, no, we need more money from the taxpayers so we can put in more food service resources, and so that we can put clothes on people. And I said, that's not your job. That's the parents' job. And it's a law enforcement issue. It's not a school issue.
Right. Yeah, we could go down that path because one of the big ones that they're chasing the money after right now in the mental health agencies is on social emotional learning. So this is something that's being pushed into a number of the states. I don't know if it's down there where you're at, but Ohio, they just pushed it in. It's absolutely evil. I've done 2 other programs on that. I've had a young man actually who studied it and understands it. And in talking with several great Christian folks that are on our state board of education, SEL is designed to make minions and destroy families, and every child is a mental health basket case. So now these agencies are chasing that money. But so that kind of takes us, into a little bit of what uh, I like in your other article here, because I think that is a tie-in as well. Is that you had something about Tolkien, the invisible thing, and I made a reference in there to Smog, or you made a reference to the dragon I called Smog, and Jezebel, and I mean, so when we talk about addiction, we talk about being drugged, you tie in the abortion uh, perspective and all of the other evils of the LGBT and the transgender stuff, which I just posted something up today about the transgender insanities, which we're fighting in Ohio and winning.
Good.
It becomes really interesting. So tell us about Smog and Jezebel and those 50 dragons that are out there a little bit.
Yeah, well, I love J.R.R. Tolkien, and we have three sons, and we raised them with that narrative in the background. Of course, I like to say that Tolkien's narrative, Lord of the Rings, made two romps through the English-speaking world. First, as the book in the '60s, and Bilbo Frodo lives became a sort of a popular piece of graffiti in the '60s and '70s, and that came out of Tolkien. And then, of course, it romped through the culture again as movies
Mhm.
in the Lord of the Rings movies, produced by Peter Jackson. But I, Tolkien was a Catholic Christian who wanted to create a narrative that had a highly moral background to it, but he didn't want to write an allegory, and so there isn't a direct connection to biblical themes. But there's the moral law from Christianity is all through the story,
Yes.
and so it's proven to be a wonderful touchstone for me with my three sons as they're now 30, 32, and 33, and having families. And we did ceremonies for them when they graduated from high school, and we included the swords from the movie.
Yeah,
We
that's great.
included the oldest boy got Gandalf's sword. He was the wizard, the oldest, the elder, the wise one. So our oldest boy got Gandalf's sword at the ceremony. Our middle boy got Aragorn's sword. He was the
Mhm.
king, and the youngest boy got the most powerful sword, which was also the smallest sword, and that was Sting, and that was Frodo's and Bilbo's sword in the story. And they still, I just saw one of the swords today. That happened to 13 years ago. I just saw one at my son's home. We were there with our grandchildren. So these, Jesus spoke most powerfully through parables.
Mhm.
He brought the truths of the gospel to us through narratives, through stories.
Mhm.
And that's the brilliance of Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, with his Narnia series and his literature. And those stories and that work, those ideas continue to reverberate through our culture, and I think they're more powerful today than they've ever been.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And within that, it's always that context, because in reading Tolkien, that's what really helped solidify for me that perspective of that I needed really Jesus, because you got to make a decision on sometimes good and evil. And so everything that we're talking about, and we look back and from the initial stories of Smog, we look at what was happening in the whole context of the towers and the two towers, or ultimately the Black Tower. It comes to that whole decision point for every individual, whose side you're going to be on. And
Well, and isn't it clear, Tom, as we think about where this HR5 thing is taking us?
mm-hmm,
Now, see, it's taking us to Down's syndrome drag queens. That's the headline from tomorrow, from yesterday on CNN.
yeah,
Down syndrome people uh, being dressed up as drag queens and being paraded in front of people and having their egos, fed by this nonsense. And this is so evil. It's not just that it's impolitic, or that we got to discuss it in policy terms, or that we got to think about it in emotional terms, in terms of counseling or whatever. No, this is moral. What's happening, what we're doing to ourselves. This is profoundly evil.
Yes.
And good, good, good people need to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so it goes to that whole thing when we look at families, we look at just all of the basic fundamentals of from that point of good and evil. And the core root of who should be the leaders in that are those Christians within the context of the church. And the church is made up of us as the bodies, but the pulpits have walked away even from that. Go ahead, you had a thought.
Yeah, I'm just telling my wife we need to stop. I live in a hollow where I'm going to lose my signal, so we're going to stop up here where I've still got a strong signal.
Okay, great.
So keep going.
No, and so when we look at that, and Kath just gave me the 5-minute signal, I think. So we're kind of close to wrapping up here anyway. But when we talk about the Jezebels, that what happened? Who was it that was standing out, as you absolutely made note in that article, standing outside the window and said, "Who's for me?" And what did the eunuchs do? The emasculated, and I used in my comeback to you was the demasculization. I made up the word, but at the same time, we see that, and we see it in the pulpits. But the real word is emasculated because it was the eunuchs. And people don't really understand what that term is. They should go look up. If they don't look it up in the dictionary, they better go look it up, because in so many ways, that's what's happened, not just to the men in America and they're trying to continue to do, but at the pulpits. So
Yeah,
I'm going to give you the next 2 minutes to wrap it.
I hadn't noticed that until recently in that passage of the scripture where Jezebel is killed. Yeah. She, like you say, she's surrounded by eunuchs, and King Jehu comes through the gate and he shouts up at Jezebel. She's standing in the window, and he says, I'm going to paraphrase here. He says, "So who's on my side? Who's on my side?" And Jezebel just kind of flips him off, right? And but the eunuchs, who have been made eunuchs by Jezebel, for some reason wake up, right? They say, "Whoa, we're going to have to do something here." So they throw her out the window.
Yeah. And it fulfills that whole prophecy too. It just, people have to read the whole story to get it, that, from the beginning to end, to understand the whole context of it. And that goes to the point, is that who's going to remain on the side, who's going to be that remnant that will stand true for our values, our principles, and what is right. And even, just from the fundamentals of what it means to be a constitutional republic. So you and I can talk from that framework, that worldview of, our Christian perspective. So Mike, give me a minute wrap. Tell us your website. Tell us what you're all about, what you're doing, and give me 2 action items that all the listeners need to do.
So go to michaelheath.org, Michael Heath, Michael, Heath, Heath.org, and check that out. So that's one action item. And be sure to read the essays by my good friend Fritz Spencer, who's now passed. And they're about what happened on marriage in Maine, very eloquent essays. And then also, if God has blessed you with resources financially, I could sure use donations. You can make a donation through my website. So those are my 2 action items, michaelheath.org.
Great. Thank you, Michael. There's so much more, that we can continue on. I wish we had the time, but, we'll have you back at some point as well, because I think I'd like to find out more of what you've been doing on taking on the social justice warriors, because we are in a war. I tell people that all the time.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
And we have to be engaged, and believers need to understand that, as someone else said on our friend Mike Spalding's program the other day, is that people forget that the leadership in Israel that Jesus was talking to was called the Sanhedrin, and they were made up of what? The religious leaders as much as from the people. And so when Jesus was talking, he was talking to the political religious leaders that were the heads of a government that should have clearly understood what was throughout the whole Torah, to the extent that they were able to recognize the Savior of the world.
Yes.
And our friend Sam Adams, because of what he understood, how he studied the Reformation, he got it right. And as I finish off here, many of those anti-federalists absolutely understood those Reformation truths and principles as well. Come on back next week when we have more fun times for everybody.
Hi friends, Pastor Mike Spaulding here to tell you about the Go Therefore 2019 conference. This year's gathering will be at the University of Northwest Ohio Event Center, July 26th and 27th. The conference will conclude Sunday, July 28th at Calvary Chapel of Lima. This is the largest gathering of acclaimed Bible teachers, researchers, and prophecy experts anywhere in the United States. Here's our speaker list. Author, Bible teacher, and host of the Kingdom Intelligence Briefing, Dr. Michael Lake. Bradley Dean, host of Sons of Liberty Radio. Author and founder and director of Peacemakers Outreach, Dr. John Diamond. Russ Disdar of Shatter the Darkness Ministries. Coach Dave Daubenmire of Pass the Salt Ministries. Pastor and author Dr. Carl Gallups. Researcher Carl Teichribb. Publisher of the Wisconsin Christian News, Rob Pugh. Author Douglas Woodward. Prophecy expert John Haller, David Arthur of Alphabet Man Ministries, filmmaker Tom Dunn, researcher David Paxton, cybersecurity and artificial intelligence researcher Mark Trump, Created Equal founder Mark Harrington, The Last Evangelist filmmaker David Heavener, author, researcher, and lecturer L.A. Marzulli, author Chad Schaefer, British filmmaker Mark Sutherland, pastor and musician Leighton Howerton, founding fathers and constitutional researcher Tom Navolis, former combat veteran and author Jamie Walden, and of course, me, Dr. Mike Spaulding. Tickets are only $59. You can secure your seat for the Go Therefore conference at this website, gothereforeconference.com. This event will sell out quickly. Ticket and hotel information is at the conference website, gothereforeconference.com. Hope to see you there.